Welcome back, friends. My name is Patty Bear. I'm a retired airline captain and the author of 2 books. I've been following the call of my wild soul since I was a child. I talk about the skills, strategies, obstacle navigation, and the mindsets needed to live from and trust this colorful, adventurous path. If you're enjoying this series and you want to be notified when more topics come out, please hit the like and subscribe button below. Before we get into today's topic, I wanted to check back in with you about playful practice and see what you found with the pennies from heaven exercise. Did you begin to notice pennies more often? And specifically, did you notice opportunities and synchronicities more often? So just a reminder that the pennies from heaven exercise has nothing to do with money. It really has to do with broadening your awareness and the ability to see small opportunities in particular out of your peripheral vision, to just pick them up automatically. We can get into a practice where we only recognize big opportunities. And so this is to recognize small opportunities, and particularly to value small opportunities because they lead to other opportunities. And then the second playful practice was about noticing delays and blocked paths, closed doors, looking back on your life and seeing where closed doors or delays actually served you. How did they change your life, and did they point you in the direction of something that was more closely aligned to your path? And the purpose of this exercise is to recognize that delays can be frustrating, blocks can be frustrating. Sometimes it means that we need to keep persisting. Sometimes it's asking us to develop more stamina. But sometimes it's the wisdom of our path that there's something better than what we imagined was possible. And so noticing delays, blocks, and their impact on your life is about building faith in your own path. And then dream journal. So are you paying attention to your dreams? Are you noticing themes or guidance within your dreams? Okay, so in the last several videos on episode 3 and 4, we talked about how to tune into guidance. And I promised that this video would be about how to ask for guidance. So not just how to be able to receive whatever comes in, but how to ask for specific targeted guidance on your path, how to shape those questions, because that's really important. But I realized something as I was preparing that presentation and thinking about how I wanted to talk about it. And I was thinking about how much the type of questions and the questions we think we dare to ask depend upon our consciousness level. So in flying, we talk about situational awareness and how absolutely crucial that is. So today, we're going to take this huge detour, and I want to talk about today's topic is going to be all about situational awareness, 4 levels of consciousness, and how they affect what kind of questions we ask. So today's video is going to run about an hour, but I hope that you'll find this tool as helpful as I have. I've used it for years. I've used it to orient myself and to think about the nature of the environments that I'm in, and also crucially to develop self-awareness about my own internal consciousness. So hopefully you'll find it as useful as I have. So what are the levels of consciousness? There are our environments, the levels of consciousness that we're operating in externally, what other people's consciousness is that influence us, our group, the family, the culture, the groups we belong to, that influences us. And then our internal personal level of consciousness, how we think about the world, how we think about spirit, that influences us well. It shapes what we ask, shapes how we ask questions, our posture in asking, which we'll talk about a little bit later, and our understanding of the answers we receive, the capability, the complexity the nuance of the answers that we can receive, and then whether we dare to ask follow-up questions or not. So I have here, obviously, a picture of the 4 seasons. We have spring, summer, fall, and winter. And it seems pretty obvious, but we're going to ask different questions in winter than we are in summer, right? Because we're in a different climate, we're in a different environment. So in the wintertime, we're going to be asking questions having to do with the cold, having to do with the kind of clothing, protective clothing we need to wear, the precautions we need to take for cold weather climates. We're not going to be asking summer questions. We're not going to be asking about where's the suntan lotion. We're not going to be asking about where's our bathing suit. We're not going to be asking about the heat index or what time of day to go outside walking so we don't get sunburned. So sort of the same concept with consciousness level. It affects what we ask. So let's take a literal example. We have here a boss and an employee. And if you think about it, the boss is probably going to ask different questions than the employee, right? I mean, they're going to have different concerns, and they're probably going to ask from a different posture as well. And the employee is going to shape their questions and their posture around asking based upon who their current boss is and probably the experiences that they've had with bosses in the past. So they're going to be thinking about, as they ask questions, they're going to be thinking about, is he or she a yeller? What's my experience? What's my typical experience? How have people been in the past? How do they receive questions? And that is going to influence whether I ask any questions. It's going to influence the type of questions I ask. Is this person open to question? In my experience, do bosses generally want to hear questions? And what kind of answers can I expect to get? So this same principle applies when we're interacting with spirit, with the universe, with collective consciousness, or God or goddess, or however you wish to think of the unseen world. We can think of it as a boss employee relationship, but we can also think of it as an equal adult, two adults collaborating, and that's going to change our posture. So in the late 70s, several individuals posited that there were stages of spiritual consciousness that individuals progressed through, and that impacted the way they interacted with the unseen world. So I have here, you'll see the names of 4 people. I think it's entirely possible that other people throughout history posited this as well. I'm not familiar with it, and not necessarily relevant to today's conversation, but there were a number of them all around the same time period that were talking about stages of consciousness. So we had the famous psychiatrist M. Scott Peck, best-selling author of The Road Less Traveled. We had Reverend Michael Beckwith in 1984. You have the evolutionary astrologer Jeffrey Wolf Green in the late 70s. And then the theologian James Fowler, he came up with 6 stages of faith. And I'm not going to go into his model today just because I think it complicates what we're talking about. But the reason I mention him is that his stages of faith were based on the childhood development posited by Jean Piaget, who wrote about, who studied cognitive and natural intelligence development in children. And then Fowler's stages were also based on Lawrence Kohlberg's stages of moral development. And I think this is important because it gives us a connection to our personal experience. We all have experience either with ourselves or with children in general of how they develop in consciousness. And that gives us a place to connect to these models from our own understanding. So M. Scott Peck, he described stage 1. He related that to a small child who was defiant and willful. For adults, he said he related to being like a small child. But he said this individual, this adult, is chaotic, disordered, and reckless. They're unwilling to accept a will greater than their own. So think here the terms a law unto oneself, or a person who considers themselves above the law. These people are extremely egoistic and lack empathy for others. They're often pretenders who cover up their lack of principles, and they're governed by nothing but their own wills and desires. These are antisocial individuals. And he said that many criminals are people who have never grown out of stage one. He called these people of the lie. Stage two, he described as formal, institutional. This is fundamental. These people are very rules-based, laws-based. They're legalistic, parochial, dogmatic. These people have a blind faith in authority figures and see the world as divided simply into good and evil, right and wrong, us and them. So stage two people, often there's one truth. They're true believers and regard people who don't believe as they do as non-believers. Non-believers stage one, and this is because they do not know that there's a stage three and stage four. So people in this stage, they have a willingness to obey and serve on the positive side, and they're religious to seek clear-cut answers and doctrines and formulations. They're looking for certainty, and they have clear-cut roles. Stage three is the skeptic individual. And these people who often as they lose religion, maybe for a while, maybe permanently, but they're questioners, they're atheists, they're agnostics, and they're scientifically minded. And he said this is the stage of skepticism and questioning. A stage three person does not accept things on faith, but only accepts them if they're convinced logically. And these people are highly committed to principle and ethics. Stage four is mystical communal, and this is a stage of love and commitment to the whole. It's about transcending differences. A person here may be religious, but they're not looking for clear-cut answers. They're desiring to enter into the mystery of uncertainty. These people start perceiving grand patterns in nature and develop a deeper understanding of good and evil, forgiveness and mercy, compassion and love. So Jeffrey Wolfreen, he talked about these stages. He called stage one dimly evolved state. And he said this is a very limited sense of self-awareness. These people, their awareness is limited to the space they personally occupy. They can be very joyous and very, very innocent. And the example given for this is a child or person with Down syndrome. They can be very innocent, very joyful. On the other hand, and the desire for this stage is to be normal. That's a desire. And on the other hand, this soul can be intensely angry, and they can create great disturbances for other people. There's a dense consciousness, and he said this was 3 to 4% of the population. Stage two is consensus orientation. And this is to material reality and also to the prevailing consensus of whatever society this person is born into. So whatever the society says, or the values, the moralities, the customs, the norms, the taboos, right and wrong, whatever that is, they will believe that and conform to that. So these people are driven by a desire to get ahead. And the evolutionary purpose of this is that it drives the expansion of knowledge of societal organization, of rules, regulations, actualizing ambition, and a larger awareness of how society works. But he said eventually what happens is that the people in stage two eventually exhaust their material desires, and they think there must be more to life than this. He said that the consensus, this correlates to nationalism. It correlates to an identity with your group, a tribal identity. And he said this was 70% of the world population. Stage three, we see the term individuated again. And these people rebel against the consensus state, liberating consciousness. And the aim, they're shaping one's sense of reality and particularly their personal identity. This person will begin to manifest within society or reality a truly unique and gifted person from the viewpoint of the consensus. And he said this was approximately 20% of the population. And then stage 4, spiritual. The center of gravity shifts from subjective ego to the soul itself. The person here unites with the source of all things. And the example given is the ocean that is aware of the waves it manifests. So it's aware of itself being both the ocean and the wave simultaneously. And this, he estimated the population at 4 to 6%. And then Reverend Michael Beckwith, he described the 4 stages in very simple, clear terms. Stage 1, he described that things happen to me. So this person has a victim consciousness. They blame others. They don't have control of themselves, fear-based. Stage 2, he said, things happen by me. So here we take control, we give up blame, we accept responsibility, and we learn spiritual tools. Stage 3, he said, things happen through me. You become a channel, it's an awakening, there's a sense of faith, and we give up control. And then stage 4, things happen as me. So a sense of being one with all life. There's no separation, and love and peace is our life. So that gives you sort of an overview of these thinkers and what they came up with. And I have a few semantic quibbles with some of these models, but nothing we need to explore today. I find them really consistent with each other and with reality in general, with my experience. I do, however, diverge from them in one way, which may or may not be important, but it's a distinction that I want to make. Their models, all of these models are called levels of spiritual consciousness, but I see them as really as the development of psychological consciousness. And psychological consciousness as a continuum of self-awareness and other awareness. And what I would say is that our psychological maturity determines the complexity and the intimacy of the relationships that we're capable of sustaining. And this is true, of course, for our human relationships, but it's also true for our level of intimacy with spirit. What are we capable? What level of relationship are we capable of having and sustaining? So I want to take a look at these stages. I'm going to pull them all together. And at the end, I'm going to give you one simple way that I think works to think about them. And let's connect them to the human developmental levels and what it means for your relationship with spirit. So stage 1 psychological development, this correlates to early childhood, infant, toddler, up to about 5 years. And in this stage, infant, toddler relates to the world from their survival wants and needs, right? That makes sense. They're not physically or cognitively developed enough to provide for themselves. They're naturally quite dependent, and they look to others for all soothing, comfort, and sustenance. Their brains and their nervous systems are not yet fully developed, so they need this support. They don't yet have the physical or psychological capability to include anyone else's needs in the world, nor the capacity for moral reasoning. The relationship for a young child with others is pretty much one-sided, particularly when they're young and very young. This is appropriate and it's healthy for children. But if a person's development is stuck in stage 1 behavior in adulthood, what we're talking about is the narcissism spectrum. It's all about me. And we're talking about basic narcissism here, from sociopathy, from basic narcissism to sociopathy and psychopathy. Stage 1 adults only relate to others as narcissistic supply. And this person, as you might imagine, is not consciously connected to spirit or even to self-awareness. Maybe connected to nature, but they're not going to be really functionally connected to other human beings, and they're not going to be connected to spirit. So it should be obvious, but if you're listening to this here today, you're not remotely in stage 1 consciousness. But here's why understanding this stage is important for you. Many cult leaders are stage 1 individuals. They're sociopaths and they're psychopaths who pass themselves off as godlike stage 4 individuals. So you have the Warren Jeffs, you have a David Koresh, you have the yoga gurus who have been caught in, and various other people who have been caught in sexual misconduct. But these are people who leverage their position and they leverage others' naivete or vulnerability to strip them of their power and their agency so that they can be preyed upon. These individuals may be obvious predators, or they could be incredibly cunning predators. They can blend in as normal. They can look like they're doing good works, being pillars of the society, holding influential positions. They can be well-liked. They can have charismatic personalities. But these are people who lie easily and convincingly and are not troubled by a conscience. And while they have little to no empathy or conscience, they can fake it well. Sometimes they can fake it really well, at least for a while in public. Privately, they may use fear, coercion, and control tactics or violence. And the law of the jungle is their guidance. For them, winning justifies everything, justifies anything. The end justifies the means. Lying, cheating, stealing, assault are simply a means to an end. So stage 1 people, as we said, may make grandiose claims of being all-seeing, all-knowing, all-powerful, and doing so with great certainty, godlike claims of infallibility. And they do this to enforce domination, submission demands, and to be able to prey on other people. So I want to make a really clear distinction here. Because stage 1 individuals often pretend to be stage 4, I want to make a really clear distinction between these two stages. The small number of individuals who are truly stage 4 do not speak the language of rigid certainties. They do not seek domination over you. They do not want your power. They do not want to seize your agency. And they willingly honor your boundaries and encourage them. They will not deceive, defraud, guilt, manipulate, force, coerce, or control. They will not only not intentionally harm you, they will consciously intend to do no harm, and they will be self-accountable. They have integrity. Who they are in public is largely the same as who they are in private. They possess empathy and compassion. They are present. They can relate to you as an individual and simultaneously to the whole. So I want to take a moment, and just for the record, I want to say I am not a stage 4 consciousness. I am like someone who has visited another country and can describe what it looks like, but not what it's like to live there. I'd also like to note that in my experience, I think most of us dip in and out of nearby stages above and below us from time to time as we grow. But we have a primary center of gravity, a primary psychological consciousness that we're developing. I also want to note that these levels, we describe them in linear terms for understanding, but these levels are not a competition and they're not a value judgment any more than being an adult is better than being a child. We all go through every single stage, and they're just a way of orienting ourselves in relation to our environments and the evolution of ourselves. They're a tool for self-awareness, and they're a tool for other awareness. So another thing, I have come to believe that we live many lives as one soul, and that our progression of consciousness takes place over a long time period, that we don't enter this life at stage 1 and leave at stage 4. We may progress physically and psychologically through those stages in one lifetime, but I don't believe that we make that level of consciousness in one lifetime. Sometimes we make big leaps, but overall, my sense is that we're gradually evolving. And if you think about this, you think about the terms young soul and old souls. It speaks to that concept. If you're not comfortable with the concept of many lives, that's okay. I want to give you another way to think about it. You can think about it that you are the leading edge of your ancestors' consciousness, and you're the beneficiary of the work of every single person in your bloodline and of humankind in general. So if you think about the systems, the inventions, the institutions our ancestors created, the ability to transcend basic survival concerns, the efforts to codify human rights, the pioneering of human consciousness, this is all part of our collective foundation. And that makes it possible for us to consider our own life from a much wider perspective than your ancestors had available. So we rest on their shoulders, we rest on the work they have done, and your developmental efforts will leave the world better than you found it as well. Okay, let's move on to stage 2. So stage 2 psychological development relates to mid to late childhood. And we're talking about roughly 5 to 7 years old up to more or less 18. But 5 to 7 years old is typically characterized as the age of reason, and with the cognitive and nervous system development is developed sufficiently that we are, as it develops, we gain increasing capacity to have agency over our thinking and agency over our choices, our behaviors. And this cognitive development continues, as I said, to the late teenage years. Recent science says that it actually continues to the age of 25. But in this stage, we learn self-regulation of our emotions, of our primal drives. We acquire basic knowledge to understand our environment and physical and social skills to survive outside our family unit, including recognizing authority outside our primal will and also outside our family structures. So if you think about this from childhood, the early stages of this process are aided by the framework our parents provide. So they give us clear and simple rules with natural consequences. They provide routines. They provide basic social and moral rules like fairness, honesty, respecting boundaries, our own and others. And this all forms the framework, the structure for us to grow on. So the latter part of this developmental process is increasingly provided by the external culture and external authority figures. So as we move out into the world, the school, the church, the groups, the activities that we belong to, they form more and more advanced elements of that structure. So now let's talk about this from the standpoint of stage 2 for adults. The psychological consciousness, if you want to think about it, spiritual consciousness. But the consciousness here at stage 2 is characterized by a desire to find a safe institutional container which replicates the parent-child relationship and can teach self-regulation, physical and social skills to assimilate in a group, and thus to find belonging. So one of the most common examples that is given of people moving out of stage 1 and into stage 2 is the career criminal who finds religion in jail. So you think about the background, the antisocial we have from stage 1, the chaotic environment, and moving into stage 2, the structure and the rules provide a framework for understanding life beyond chaos. And the church and the church community, the church provides a community for integrating into the larger society and no longer being an outlaw. So for that reason, I've seen stage 2 described as lawful. Stage 2 consciousness is characterized by rigid rules, by binary thinking that provides clarity through clear contrasts. So we're talking about black and white thinking, good and bad, right and wrong, male and female, heaven and hell. It's also characterized by hierarchical structures with a parent figure as a leader. So we have here a father, God, child relationship, we have guru disciple, we have leader follower. And this structure provides psychological safety through certainty provided by someone bigger than us, and step-by-step instructions for succeeding at life. And I say, bigger than us in quotes, because that's the psychological desire. We're looking for a parental figure. So through most of stage 2, we don't dare question these parental leaders or religious authority figures. We have blind faith and we simply obey. And we talked about this. People in this stage see themselves as true believers, and anyone who doesn't agree with them is stage 1 non-believers, because there's an unawareness of stage 3 and 4. So unity in stage 2 is defined as conformity to the parent's teachings, the family or social group. Communication is comprised of a lot of echoing of others' thoughts, of quotes, cliches, scriptures, history, stereotypes, could be gossip as well. But there's this this pattern of echoing. Communication is often a one-way monologue. So the minister or the parent preaches and we listen. Because of the huge power differential between roles in this stage, there's a strong propensity for abuse of power, especially because of the relative immaturity of consciousness of those who rise to leadership roles and their newness to gaining power or control over themselves. So what happens is there's projection, and you can have a tendency for the authority figures or the leaders to try to control others rather than themselves. And sometimes to try to control others in order to control themselves. So they're, and that's a regression back to stage 1, where they are needing others to regulate them so that someone else's behavior determines whether they behave or not. So structures are often organized by these immature souls as dominance hierarchies that normalize and legalize stage 1 domination, submission, predatory behavior. Followers won't question and will automatically echo the narrative and beliefs of these leaders. And because of the developmental need for certainty and to look up to a parental type figure, there is an attraction to putting uber confident individuals on a pedestal, and thus a susceptibility to cults of all kinds. So you can have religious cults, marketing cults, political, spiritual, financial, but it all stems from this desire to, from this childlike consciousness of, I need to look up to someone, I need certainty, and I need to be told what to do. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. As we said, it's a stage of consciousness, and we all go through it. So the Dalai Lama said, learn the rules thoroughly so you can break them responsibly. Stage 2 is all about learning the rules, and stage 3 is about breaking them responsibly. So in the transition from stage 2 to 3, as we get ready to exit stage 2, we have demonstrated the ability to follow rules, to follow morals, to follow regulations, to observe social boundaries, and to show respect for others. We have developed a capacity for self-discipline and self-regulation. We've learned to accept responsibility for ourselves and for our behavior at the tail end of stage 2. And we have learned to make basic repairs when we've harmed someone. So then what comes from this is a developmental need becomes to separate from consensus reality in order to gain objectivity and to define oneself. Who am I outside of the group? Who am I as a person, rather than who am I as a member of a named group? What is my name becomes the question. And the task becomes to author our own life and to become the authority on ourself. So we begin the separation phase through small rebellions that gradually become more substantial disagreements with our culture. So if you think about this and you correlate it to like being a teenager, right? So there's a rebellion stage, and that is perfectly normal. Individuals are beginning to evaluate their environment. They're observing patterns that they hadn't noticed before. They're reality testing. They're asking, is this really true? So I've been told these things all of my life, and is it really true? They begin to note inconsistencies, hypocrisies, abuse by authority figures who violate the laws that they wrote and enforce on others. They notice unfairness, they notice immorality, dishonesty, and they notice small-minded, simplistic rigidity. And so rigidity in particular, it doesn't make room for reality. So the rules are too rigid to adjust to people's individuality. So in the transition, individuals are going to gradually question everything they've been taught, and they're going to begin to speak up and speak out. In this stage, as we leave stage 2, we are seen as disobedient. So remember, stage 2 is all about being disobedient. As we get ready to leave that, we become disobedient, and our community may see us as heretics going to hell. So I want to highlight this because our bodies carry the ancestral memory of what it has meant to be a heretic, of being burned at the stake, of being hunted, of being an outcast, of the barbaric treatment that is meted out for simply questioning the authorities. To question what we have been taught, to dissent, and to have a voice often feels terrifying. So if you're feeling that, that is consistent with this stage, or if you have felt that. And there is historical reality for that. And depending upon what your nation, what your culture, what your family is, there can be personal danger with that as well. So if an individual is rising out of a particularly authoritarian environment, they are likely to wake up from stage 2 to discover with some astonishment that they have been handing over power to narcissistic individuals with incredibly immature consciousness levels. And this sudden aha may be enough to propel an individual out of the gravity of stage 2, and the era of blind faith is gone for good. So another thing besides feeling like a heretic is that this stage can feel really disorienting. It can look like chaos. But it's not the chaos that's generated by stage 1 antisocial behavior of rejecting all the rules. It's not the childish temper tantrum of you can't tell me what to do. It's a different kind of chaos. It's much more thoughtful than that. And it correlates to the liminal state in transformation. The liminal state is this period where we're dying to our old self so that a new self can emerge. This is the time when the caterpillar has dissolved, but it is not yet a butterfly, and it doesn't have any idea yet that it's going to become a butterfly. So it's a state of complete uncertainty, and that's in direct contrast to the cocoon of certainty that has been our comfort zone in stage 2. Again, this disillusion can be terrifying because it feels like annihilation. So we have the terror of feeling like we're a heretic, of speaking out, of being disobedient, and also the terror of dissolution. Like I have no idea what is to come. I'm not what I used to be, but I'm not yet what I will become. So M. Scott Peck argued that from stage 1 to 2 was a sharp transition. This might be the, as we mentioned, this might be the career criminal who finally gets caught and goes to prison. And then as a result of going to prison, finds religion. He argued that going from stage 3 to 4 was gradual. I would argue that the transition from stage 2 to 3 is gradual and then sharp. So the disillusionment accumulates until it results in a crisis and a sharp break from the familiar. And this is followed by a flight of liberation into the unknown. This no man's land, this liminal period that we talked about between stage 2 and 3 is largely characterized by defining what we want to leave behind. So what family or cultural beliefs do we not agree with and don't want to bring with us on our journey of individuation? What do we not want to have as part of our future? What are we going to do differently? Okay, stage 3, psychological maturity. So this consciousness correlates to the physical period of adulthood. So you think about the kind of activities you're engaged in adulthood. You are physically independent. You are supporting yourself, your survival. You are socially independent. You're liberated from the family. Doesn't mean that you don't see them, doesn't mean that you don't love them, but it means you're an independent person. So, and this stage lasts through most of our life until we get to probably around 60 or so. And the range of this stage is large enough that I could spend hours on this topic alone. So what I'm going to do, because what I want to do is keep the general big picture view of the situational awareness of these different stages. So I'm not going to go into way in depth of this, even though we could, but I'm going to share the big picture view. The two main aims that we're doing in this stage are individuation and collaboration partnership. So I'm going to talk about those here. Then in the next slide, I'm going to just share with you an overview of the kind of skills that you learn in stage 3. And I think that'll give you fill in a few of the blanks without going into depth about what's involved in this stage. So first, individuation. Individuation is the hero's journey of actualizing one's unique identity and assuming the responsibility to self-govern. So we're going to deconstruct all our old belief structures, and then we're going to reconstruct new ones, which we will hold ourselves accountable to. So a person who is truly stage 3 doesn't need outside regulations or laws or the fear of hell to act ethically. They act ethically because it's their internal constitution, it's their internal law, and because they're accountable to themselves. In this stage, our standards are often higher than level 2 consensus reality anyway. So here we develop our unique talents and gifts. That's part of the individuation. We dedicate ourselves to the mastery and the expression of these gifts. And psychologically and spiritually, we synthesize the different parts of ourselves, the unconscious and the conscious, the soul and the personality, the mystical and the mundane, and the end product of stage 3 is we achieve a robust 3-dimensional integrity, something that I call wholeness. So all of our parts, we're not one way in private, one way in public. We have all of our parts integrated. We're whole. So then the second main focus of stage 3 is collaboration and partnership. And I want to make several distinctions. So one, I want to make a distinction between cooperation and collaboration because they can get mixed up. And cooperation is labor to support another person's vision or goals. So we learned how to do this in stage 2. If we were a parent, we cooperated to raise our child. If we were a child, we cooperated with our parents. That's different than collaboration. So collaboration is where we have a shared vision and we work on toward a shared goal. So I think that's an important distinction between cooperation and collaboration. Second, when I talk about partnership, I'm not necessarily talking about romantic partnership. I'm talking about the act of collaborating with another person or with a team. So this can be business, this can be writing a book, this can be working on a project, but anything where we work from a shared vision and toward a shared goal is partnership. Third, I want to note that we don't have to be fully individuated to collaborate. I think some people believe that we do, but I believe that collaboration is actually a part of the process of individuating, and that as we work with other people, it's in dialogue with others that we come to understand ourselves better. They act as a mirror. They help us develop our self-awareness. They help us develop, see what talents we have, what talents we don't have, which is great because then we either know what we don't want to waste our time on or what we need to develop. But collaboration is part of the individuation process, in my opinion. But we do, in order to collaborate rather than just cooperate, we do need to be developing an independent self. So here in stage 3, the ability to submit to something larger than ourselves. And this is what was being, if you think about stage 2, this is what was being developed. The ability to submit to something bigger than ourselves. It comes into play at a higher evolutionary level here. So here in collaboration, we are in service to a shared goal, and the ability to listen to authority from stage 2 that was developed there. This gives way to, again, a higher evolutionary level of that same principle. So the ability to listen to authority gives way to the ability to appreciate other people's expertise and their authority in a particular specialty or talent. And then to appreciate that diversity and to work with other people, to work with other people's authority and to work within our own authority. So that within partnership and teams, we mature our understanding of shared power and shared responsibility, and also shared gifts. How we share our gifts, how we coordinate them. So when we talk about following the call of your wild soul, we are talking about the process of individuation and collaboration with spirit. So this is a focused effort on developing that seed of something unique within you that asks to be lived. And if you think back to, I think I did it in either the first or second video, the acorn theory. If you haven't watched that, go back and watch that. But that's the stage 3 is about that conscious process of developing that which is already within you and that asks to be lived, and developing that in collaboration with spirit as a partnership. And so we do this in dialogue and partnership with both the personal unconscious and with the collective unconscious. So the thing about stage 3 is we essentially cut out the middleman who would act as authorities interpreting spirit with us, and the risk of it coming through with their bias. So, again, this is just a function of stage 3. We're independent. We have direct relationships with other people. And with spirit, we ask directly, and we don't receive our information through the filters of stage 2 consciousness individuals. Again, this doesn't mean that we don't consult people who are experts in their fields. We can still consult theologians, scientists, experts of all kinds. It simply means that we don't make them our sole or main authority. We always retain our own sovereignty. And that is stage 3, is developing and owning our sovereignty. So we evaluate what they're saying and how they're saying it, but we claim and maintain our own sovereignty. So stage 3 is all about broadening one's understanding massively, understanding ourselves, understanding our environments, and foreign people, foreign cultures, foreign perspectives. So it often feels like drinking from a fire hose. This is the rapidly expanding awareness and all the new skills to learn, so that sometimes what happens is that a retreat to the simplistic certainties of stage 2 can feel appealing. So if you've ever heard young adults groaning about adulting, this is the equivalent when we step into stage 3. Oh my gosh, there's so much to learn. Oh my gosh, I'm on my own. Not yet masterful at being on our own. We have to find our way. We have to make new connections. We have to learn new skills. And it feels onerous in the beginning. But with time and independence, this broader world begins to feel exhilarating, and we become self-motivated and self-directed learners. So what are some of the skills development? There's 4 main areas here in stage 3, and all forms of we have thinking, and this is all forms of critical and analytical thinking toward a more objective understanding of the world around you. So we talked about reality testing, self-reflection, self-awareness, discerning, entertaining diverse ideas and perspectives. Diversity is huge in this stage, and then synthesizing it. The second skill has to do with self-actualization, and that's realizing. So making something real, creating something from one's own vision, and life as self-expression. Relationship skills, advocating, listening for understanding, dialogue, collaboration, empathy, conflict resolution, tuning into the unseen and the unconscious. And then the wisdom skills, seeing patterns, symbolic sight, understanding the symbols of something, metaphors, seeking the bigger picture, seeking insight, managing paradox, and developing your own philosophical framework. We move into stage 4, psychological maturity. In the physical sense, we can see the stage in people with a communal conscience. So people who share the fruits of their presence effortlessly and simply because they want to. So this is the mature oak tree in the acorn theory. It's this majestic presence. It provides shade, shelter, food, beauty, inspiration, or maybe just a role model, just standing tall. So we talk about representing as a common word today. These are people who represent. They represent something, and they represent it because they have earned it. So these people don't need to do anything necessarily. They simply are. In the psychological and spiritual sense, the paradoxical parts of ourselves that we work so hard to integrate in stage 3 for an intentional wholeness, now we surrender into something bigger. We let go. And we don't just manage paradox, we transcend paradox. So the mystical and the physical move as one. We are in the flow, and this is effortless effort. I think about it also as improv, but we become goalless and powerful in that fluidity. I think a wonderful example of this flow state is Bruce Lee, the legendary martial artist. He described this state perfectly when he said, "Be like water, my friend." He talked about being formless, being shapeless, to flow and to crash, to take the shape of whatever we're in, which is a different thing than stage 2 conforming. It's this sense of flow, to be able to move in tune with oneself and with the moment, with the environment seamlessly. And he described it as being in a constant process of relating. So the person here is in tune with transcendent universal laws. So here we go beyond. So stage 2 is about man-made laws and the morals and the taboos of a particular culture. Then stage 3, we have ethical and principle concerns about how we treat each other, how we want to behave, what we what we believe and how we want to act out that belief. But the person here in stage 4 is in tune with transcendent universal laws. So universal laws apply to everyone equally. Doesn't matter whether they're male, female. It doesn't mean whether they're rich or poor. It doesn't mean whether they're, it just applies equally. So here we have universal laws such as all is one, the golden rule, treat others as you would want to be treated. And these universal laws are expressed in timeless, elegant expressions. They're often from the great mystics that have survived centuries unchanged because they're simple, because they're elegant, and because they're universal. So at this level, we understand the world holistically, energetically, and vibrationally, but most of all, relationally. So, so I put these together in what I hope is a simple way. You have the background for how we talked about this. I organized them into 4 stages of psychological development. Lawless, these are the people who are a law unto themselves, antisocial individuals. The lawful, people who are This is the us versus them social organization and rules supporting one truth. These are clear-cut black and white rules. Individuated partner. These are the skeptics, people who are individuating and collaborating. And then mystical, the flow state, people who are in a communal consciousness, a unity with all things. So 2 years ago, my husband hiked through all 2,000 plus miles of the Appalachian Trail. And every year, thousands of hikers begin this journey in Georgia in early spring, and they end in Maine in late summer or early fall. And how crowded the trail and the shelters gets depends upon where the bulk of the hikers are at any time. So far ahead of this group and far behind them, the trail is a fairly solitary experience, and it's less crowded. So my husband carried an app to monitor where this group of hikers was, the bulk of them, and it was called the bubble. And he could track it as he moved along the trail. So the same is true of the collective human consciousness. There's a bubble, and you can watch it move like a wave out of one stage and into the next. And Jeffrey Wolf Green has estimated several decades ago that 70% of the human population, the bubble, was in what roughly correlates to stage 2 of all these models, the conformist, the institutional model. So I believe, and what I have called in mind lawful, I believe the bubble has moved substantially since then, and that the center of gravity is currently in the process of transitioning out of stage 2 and into stage 3. There are still journeyers who started out earlier or later or walked faster or slower, but I believe the bubble of this transition, the collective bubble of consciousness, is moving out of stage 2 and into the beginning stages of 3, and that's going to affect all of us. So why do I believe the bubble is currently evolving from stage 2 to 3? Primarily because of the size of the exodus from organized religion, the eruption of the sexual abuse scandals in many religions and many spiritual organizations or cults, the exposure of the abuse of power within churches, the challenging of the strict gender roles promoted in many religions, also the hypocrisy between the values the leaders and institutions teach and how they behave, and increasing disillusionment with authority figures and institutions. Social media has played a big part in this. Abuses that were once able to be kept secret, to be siloed, and individuals to be silenced, particularly because they didn't realize there was anyone else. They thought they were the only ones. Social media has allowed these individuals to speak and to reach a much wider audience, and for victims to realize they're not alone, and for members to realize that these outliers, they're not outliers, but they're a pattern of behavior. So the hypocrisy exposed has contributed to disillusionment on a grand scale, and I don't think we're likely to see this genie put back in the bottle. But also, ironically, the resurgence of authoritarianism and nationalism around the world points to a backlash from those individuals and the groups resisting the exodus out of stage 2. So I think of this as an analogy from domestic abuse. The most dangerous time is when an authoritarian feels like they're losing control. So when the target of their control is leaving, they escalate their controlling behavior. And hence we have authoritarianism and nationalism and the rise of controlling behavior. And it may take several tries before that person leaves permanently. But I think collectively we are squarely in the most dangerous time of people leaving and the backlash to it. I think that is the nature of the upsurge in controlling behavior we're seeing. However, I also think that the inertia of a growing mass of people with an evolutionary imperative to individuate will eventually prevail. That inertia of the bubble, you can't stop that forever. So I hope that for those who are in the transition stage, I hope that this information helps to orient them toward freedom. And if you're in stage 3, I hope it validates some of your experiences. In either case, I hope that for anybody listening to this, it gives you a situational awareness to understand the overall model and to orient yourself. So we come back to the original premise for this situational awareness exercise, looking at our environments and how they influence our priorities, our questions, and our choices. As we talked about, that includes both our external physical environments and our external, the level of consciousness of the groups that we're in, and also our internal psychological environment. So we talked about stage 2 is a very parental model. We have there an all-knowing father figure, and the person asking for guidance understands themselves as a dependent child in relation to this powerful and sometimes intimidating person. So asking for the guidance under this model often comes in the form of prayer. Often the prayer is a request for some specific outcome, healing, deliverance, grace, forgiveness, the strength to endure a bad situation. And we have here the socialization around the answers that we get, the socialization that one must be grateful for whatever we get and must obey. The posture here, the posture of prayer often involves being on one's knees and or bowing one's head. And this is the posture of supplication, sometimes pleading, and acknowledging a more powerful authority figure than oneself. So how would a stage 2 consciousness affect what someone thinks they can ask for? If you're coming from that state of mind, what are you allowed to ask for? How much are you allowed to ask for? How bold are you allowed to be in your asking? Can you talk back? Can you reject the answer if it doesn't sound right to you, if it doesn't feel right to you, if it doesn't feel specific to your path? Can you ask follow-up questions, or will that seem disobedient? Do you need to earn the right to guidance with good works or worship? So that's consciousness of stage 2. How are you going to ask? Questions in stage 3 are going to look different and they're going to feel different. They're going to be asking about personal insight on our journey of individuation. We're going to ask questions about the nature of how systems work, about patterns, about how the universe operates. Stage 3 is this broad quest for understanding and meaning. So we're going to ask broad questions. We're going to ask questions about foreign things. We're just really expanding our awareness here, and our questions come from that. So our posture in asking questions are going to be radically different in stage 3. We're no longer going to be asking from a submissive, inferior position or a fear that we're being impudent with our questions. We ask from a posture of equality and mutual respect. We ask from a posture of being an adult, of asking another adult, of asking an equal, of collaborating. Our posture is going to be one of curiosity and openness, and one of the delight of learning. So curiosity is huge. This is a fundamental shift, and it changes our capacity for hearing, and it changes our capacity for understanding more nuanced answers, and for taking the answer that we receive and applying it to our particular situation. So understanding a metaphor that applies to us specifically. And so we come back, we talked at the beginning about dreams. So stage 2 dream interpretation would take dreams from, oh, here's what the dream encyclopedia says. So what does your dream mean? But stage 3, we look at a dream and we evaluate it based upon our personal connection. How do we feel in that dream? What do the symbols of that dream have particular meaning for us? And I gave you in, I think, video number 4, a good reference for that. But that's what we're talking about, the ability to take these metaphors and to make them personal. and the answers. So our response to answers is going to be different. It's not going to be reactive, obedient. It's going to be discerning. It's going to be contemplative. And it's going to be responsive. We're going to give ourselves time and the permission to choose freely, because we're taking responsibility, not just for our experience, but also for our understanding. So before we agree to something, we're going to take time to think about it. This isn't about being obedient. So that's our big detour. I hope it's given you an orientation on the larger journey. I hope it's provided you with some situational awareness. And I hope as we get into the next video that it'll provide a broader context and a greater permission for shaping your questions, for asking what you want and need as you collaborate with spirit. So as you know, I like to end with playful practice. And so the playful practice that I offer to you is orient yourself on your own soul's journey. Think about these levels and where do you see yourself in this journey of consciousness? Are you in stage 2? Are you in transition? Are you in stage 3? Where do you feel like you are? And then where do you see the people you come from? Your culture you come from? Where do you see that consciousness level? And what about the group that you're currently with? And what would it look like and here's a bit of a stretch, what would it look like for you to hang out with, to keep company with people at the next level? So you can think about that early stage 3. What does it look like for someone who's completely comfortable in stage 3? Maybe they're not completely mature, but they know what they're doing. If you're late stage 3, what might it feel like to hang out with a group of people in stage 4? People who are in the flow. What would that, what kind of questions would you ask them? What was your experience? What would you gain from that experience? And then the last, as you think about where your bubble of consciousness is, think about how you have been conditioned to seek guidance. What have you been told you can't ask for? How have you been told? What posture have you been told you have to ask for? And what kind of answers have you been allowed to receive? So some things to think about. You can do all of them. You can do one of them. You can do none of them. But those are some places to play before our next video. So video number 6 in the Wild Soul series, as I promised, this time I'm pretty sure this will be next. We're going to continue with an exploration of how to ask these questions. Now that we have our situational awareness, how are we going to formulate targeted, smart questions? The better question you ask, the better of an answer you'll get. That's true in physical life. That's also true in dialogue with the spirit world. Better questions, better answers. So then we're going to talk about how to process and use discernment in the guidance you receive. How do we look at these answers that we receive? And how can we take these answers and make decisions that are the best fit for you and your personal individual journey? So that's it for now. Signing off, and I'll see you in video number 6. Life's an adventure. Live it.